We're going to talk about an issue that's been very, very much talked about in the newspapers. We read about it, but I think mostly as South Africans, we see it as something that doesn't really concern us. Of course, that is the closure of the US government and, of course, the debt crisis that has been raging all over the news. But finally, a decision has been reached to raise $16.7 trillion in order to stop the government from defaulting from its debt.
You know, the question is, how does it affect us? Because we look at this and we think that we all tourists, we travelers, we go there. We've heard that attractions in the US, like the Statue of Liberty, the Grand Canyon, all these things, and of course all the parks have been closed. It's affecting South Africa and the rest of the world, but how?
Exactly.
So we're calling in our experts to help us. Associate Professor of Macroeconomics, University of Cape Town. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
You've got such a long title. I almost don't know where to start.
My first question, just in order to try and understand, is how does the government, especially one like the United States, possibly even fail to pay its debt?
Yeah, it's sort of, this is a really shocking situation. The U.S. government can certainly afford to pay its debt. And this debt ceiling is just a pro forma strategy of raising it, just like passing a budget is. So every year when Congress passes a budget, which means how much revenue they're going to raise and how much they're going to spend, implied in that is what your deficit's going to be and what the overall debt should be. So they knew well ahead of time that the debt was going to reach a certain amount, and to have to raise the debt ceiling should be just sort of a pro forma type of action.
Yeah.
And instead, it's become a political battle between the Republicans and the Democrats, and I think this has sort of deep political roots as opposed to economic roots.
But surely there's just a decision that needs to be made. I mean, it's the third week. I kind of want to know, how is this affecting the states? We only read about it in our newspapers.
Yeah, well, you know, my opinion is that it's, in fact, it may be a good thing that the government shut down and people can see if the government does something for them. A lot of people in America seem to think that the government doesn't do anything for the society. And now they're sort of feeling the pain of it because we realize it affects people all over. This really represents a battle between a president who was elected who's very, let's say, social-leaning. The policies that he's advocating, in fact, the key issue that they're fighting about in Congress is this Obamacare, which is a form of, a more socialized form of medical aid for everybody in the country. And the Republicans, or I should say a certain group of Republicans, this Tea Party group, are adamantly opposed to it. And in fact, they closed down the budget, demanding that, that they change or retract large parts of this Obamacare bill, this health care bill. And of course, asking that from the man who put forward the bill was a non-starter. So that was doomed to failure.
Tell me this, what would have happened had the US government defaulted on its debt to the rest of us? How would that have affected South Africa and the rest of the world? What would we have been looking at?
Yeah. You know, aside from the way the U.S. government affects people in the U.S. because they're not spending anything, what's very important is that U.S. Treasury bills are widely held as assets all around the world by all sorts of financial institutions, governments, and so forth.
Yes.
Now, when there's a default, not all of those Treasury bills are defaulted, but the ones that are due today and are supposed to be paid today can't be paid. So now governments, pension funds, investors around the world are holding a piece of paper which basically has no value because it's a defaulted piece of paper. Now, most people believe, we don't really believe the U.S. government would never pay that. Everyone sort of understood that this was a bit of brinksmanship and gamesmanship. So it wouldn't be like holding Russian bonds at the time of the revolution, but it means that now you're holding a piece of paper which normally has some value.
Yeah.
You could go to the bank, get some credit against it. You could use it for something, and no one wants to touch it.
Wow.
So you've removed a whole bunch of liquidity from the world and a lot of confidence in your investments, in your paper. I mean, this is extremely important for government.
And thus the economy as we know it would kind of implode.
Well, everything would contract.
Yeah.
It's like you're removing a whole bunch of money from the system at one time.
Wow.
And Now, what might happen? Federal Reserve might start pumping more money into the system.
Well, thank goodness that 16.7 trillion US dollars has been agreed upon to help the government not default on its debt. Thank you very much,
Thanks,
Professor, for
Professor.
joining us this morning.
Thank you, pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, that was the buzz and what's happening on the economic side of things in the world. Right now, let's check in with Grant and Ewan and hear what's happening there.